Welcome to our workshop on questioning strategies that are hot. Look forward to sharing with you just how hot we can make our questions in the classroom. And this is brought to you by Grand Canyon University and the Canyon Professional Development Team. And hi, my name is Stacey Bosma, and I am a part of that Canyon Professional Development Team. Happy to be here, and I bring with me 15 years of experience in the classroom, as well as working with students in outdoor settings and students and teachers in the outdoor settings, and being able to provide professional development with teachers in a nonprofit setting. So welcome, and my email there is cecilia.bosma@gcu.edu. Please feel free to reach out to me if you ever have any questions. I'm always here to help. And if I don't know the answer, I will try to find someone that does. So as we get started, let's take a look at this quote. I always like to start with a quote just to get us thinking on the topic of focus. And today I found this quote, and it goes, "Think left and think right and think low and think high. Oh, the things you can think up if only you try." Brought to us by Dr. Seuss. And when we think about hot questioning, we really are trying to develop our students' thought processes so that they are reaching those highly cognitive levels of thinking and understanding that bring that synthesis and knowledge and application about. So Dr. Seuss knew it, way back there, and it is about thinking and synthesizing and making, creating new ideas, right? On here together, but we have some objectives. We definitely want to develop some techniques for using questioning and discussion techniques to develop that critical thinking, deeper learning. We want reasoning and reflection that encourage student participation. Then we'll analyze ways to engage students in learning with rich learning experiences that include those questioning techniques, and collaboration and teamwork, and opportunities that require thinking and reflecting. And then finally, we're going to look at how we can construct hot questions for our lessons. And we're also going to kind of take a deep dive into using the questioning formulation technique, which is super helpful for both teachers and students. And as you're thinking about this, think about the proverbial toolbox. What tools are you going to put in your toolbox to take back to your classroom? And the thing I always urge, though, is that when we fill up our toolboxes, that we need to make sure that we open that toolbox and use these ideas as soon as we do take it back to the classroom. So let's start with a hot question. If you started a YouTube channel, what would it be called, and what would your videos be about? And you might want to pause the video here and just take a couple of minutes to think about an answer to that question. And if you were doing this in your classroom, you might think this question seems a little bit out of the blue, but a question like this could connect to a lot of different topics. For instance, you might say, what if you were a character in a book that we were reading, and you said, from that character's point of view, how would you answer this question? If that character was going to start a YouTube channel, what would it be called, and what would the videos be about? So using it in different contexts leaves it really open, but it synthesizes all the learning that's surrounding that particular topic. So take a minute, fit this into something that you've been working on recently with your students, and how would you answer it? So let's dive deep now into hot questions. How do we use questions to guide instruction and challenge our students? And it's how we use knowledge, because we want to be able to use our knowledge, not just know a lot of stuff. Knowing a lot of stuff is good, but what are we going to do with it? So for instance, rather than telling our students what we want them to know, we want to ask questions to help develop their thinking. For instance, if you're introducing a new topic in science, instead of telling them that today we will learn about condensation, how about we show them a water bottle and let them ask the questions? Or show them a water bottle with condensation on the outside and ask the students, what's going on here? Why is there water on the outside of the water bottle? And it help drive questions where you're finding answers and you're cycling to ask more questions. And that's where hot questions or higher order questions, higher order thinking questions play in to building that deep knowledge that's useful for application. So what are those higher order thinking questions? Because not all questions are created equally. If we take a look here at the progression of these questions, we have what is the book? And that's very at the sort of at the bottom level of Bloom's taxonomy, remembering. And how can you describe a book? Perhaps we've moved into understanding. How do you read a book? Maybe we could level up a little bit to why do you read a book? Now we're having them start to apply or analyze. And then why are books important? We're asking our students now to evaluate. And this is where we get into a hot question. And so if we look back at that beginning question, what is a book? And compare it to why are books important? There's a big difference in the level of understanding that goes into those two different questions. And this is why we want to work on higher order thinking questions, because we want that application process to happen. We want our students to be analyzing, evaluating, and ultimately creating with the knowledge that they have. So what is a hot question? Hot, which is higher order thinking questions, they require analysis of information. And there's also a judgment that happens, a position or an opinion on a topic. Or perhaps we want them to create. With the question, we're driving a creation of a new concept or idea on a topic. So they've learned the foundational information. Now, what are they going to do with it? And that's where we're taking our kind of more foundational questions, basic questions, and leveling them up to cause our students, to drive our students to synthesize that information and create new knowledge that is going to require action, right? And creativity. So looking at Bloom's taxonomy, we have the foundations, and this is oftentimes that remember, recalling facts. If we're not thinking about it, and in our busy and hectic lives as teachers, sometimes we can get sort of stuck at remember and understand type of questions with our students. But that's okay, because we do need those questions. That's where we always start. But we want to be able to move up into application, analyzation, evaluation, and creation. And so just taking the time to start formulating questions that are further up Bloom's taxonomy will really elevate the learning that is happening in your classroom. So keep in mind that when we look at remember and understand, those questions are necessary and they should be asked. But we also, once we have established that foundation, want to move up. And when we look at analyze, evaluate, and create, they are not necessarily a hierarchy. Each one of those is a necessary part of learning. So don't think that you can outdo yours and analyze with an evaluate, or outdo and evaluate with a create, but rather all three of those are important components to learning and fully understanding the subject matter. So including all three types of questions can be really helpful in the classroom. And not to negate application of knowledge or the foundational remember and understand, because those are also important. But what we want to do is move past that and make sure that we're getting our students up to where they're synthesizing that information and creating some new knowledge through application, analyzation, evaluation, and creation. So what are these different types of questions? So at the bottom of Bloom's is those foundations of learning. And at this level, we would call these closed questions. And these are questions with only one answer, such as yes or no. There is a right and a wrong answer, and that answer can be found in a textbook or learning media. But an open question are questions that are found further up the pyramid in the analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And these questions are open-ended, and they require outside thought, viewpoint, and knowledge. With an open-ended question, we're asking our students to predict, apply. We want them to draw conclusions, put things in order, be able to distinguish, classify, compare, or explain. And with a closed question, you might be using a starter such as, do you know? Can you recognize? You might just be asking them to name something, list something. So with an open question, those are often started with a why or a how. And a closed question might be a who, a what, a when, or where. And as we can see there, the who, the what, the when, the where, all have pat answers. There's a right answer and a wrong answer. And those answers can be found directly from the textbook, and they're kind of easy to answer, right? If the student reads material, it's an easy answer, if you will. But when we start asking why and how, now we're asking them to deepen their explanation, and it requires drawing conclusions and applying what they're learning. So think about what kinds of questions you're asking and what are those question words that you're using. Those will be a great tip to decide, am I doing an open question or a closed question? And once I've done those closed questions, I need to move beyond to open questions. That's always super important to keep the hot questions flowing in the classroom. So taking a deeper look at that, those foundation questions, and by foundation, we're kind of talking about the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. We have those answers that are found in the text. We want to evaluate comprehension. It might just be a simple review and summary of content. But if we move further, we have brainstorming questions that support the higher order thinking. And so thinking about higher order thinking questions, we want to encourage critical thinking and problem solving. Oftentimes, the higher order questions are going to be stimulating conversation and further research. They require strategic thinking. We want them to be reasoning and developing a plan, a sequence of steps to approach problems. It requires decision-making and justification, using abstract and complex ideas. These are not routine. They often have more than one possible answer. And if you will, it's extended thinking, because students are going to be investigating and thinking about how it applies to the real world. It requires time for research and problem solving. It's a process of multiple conditions of the problem or task. Um, it requires thinking analytically. And it is a skill that does require practice. Often, kind of like driving a car. So it can be taught and it can be learned. Uh, and it will improve with practice. But like many other skills, such as riding a bike, it only will be improved upon as we use it. So we want to make sure that we're not just telling our students about it, but we're showing them and we're immersing them in hot questions. So thinking about creating hot questions, we want to start with a question stem and add what you want them to know. And when we think about question stems, consider the different types of questions that you might ask in the classroom. For instance, one might say, tell me the difference between an addition and a multiplication problem. Instead, a better way to frame that might be, I want you to think, pair, share with a partner for the next 2 minutes about the difference between an addition and a multiplication problem. So now we're asking them to really analyze and we're giving them time to do it, and we're asking them to do it in a small group. Another example might be, who can tell me who the antagonist is and why? Perhaps you're reading a story. Who can tell me who the antagonist is? Oftentimes when we ask questions like this, there's some students that are eager to answer and other students that are just not going to because they figure someone else will answer it for them. How can we get around that? How about we ask it in this way? Consider the characters that we know so far in the story. Take 20 seconds and try to decide who you think is the antagonist and why. I will ask you to share in 20 seconds. When we ask a question like this, we're giving students time to think, and we're encouraging all the students to consider the question and find their own answer, because they know that there's a chance that they might get called upon instead of just asking for volunteers. Here's another example. Billy, can you explain the difference between a solid and a liquid? And we can see right there that when you ask the question directly at one student, guess what all the other students are going to do? Nothing. That's right, because Billy's on the hot seat. He's the only one that's going to answer the question. Instead, let's think about this. In what ways are solids and liquids different? Turn to your partner and discuss some of these differences. I will call on you to share, a few of you to share in a few minutes. Now we've given them a time frame to work with. They're going to be talking with a partner, which is a great way. Two heads are always better than one. It gets everybody engaged. They can't just sit there and stare off into space. And then they know that in a few minutes they need to have a response ready. So this is just a few of the ways that sentence stems and question stems can help build those hot questions. And let's think about, how does Bloom's taxonomy work with hot questions? Well, just consider, am I asking those right questions that start to get our students to be analytical? Are they creating? Are they just simply telling you, recalling information? We want to focus on the process that is required to answer hot questions rather than the answers themselves, and advance learning through questioning. We want to differentiate instruction through those questioning strategies. you can see how foundational questions have to be answered and understood before moving to those higher order questions. And definitely be sure to use relatable question stems, such as what are some? What might you say? If you use more conversational language, it doesn't seem so intense, and it makes it a little bit easier for the students to adapt to. So think about that as you are creating your higher order questions. So when am I going to use these higher order thinking questions? How often? Well, really, you can use hot questions anytime. Use it with whole group discussion. Definitely integrate it into small group discussion. Perhaps you have one-on-one seminars with your students, or have your students seminaring with each other. Higher order questions even have a place in tests, and multiple choice questions can even be written in a higher order thinking style. The important thing is to make sure that the hot questions that are on the test are part of the learning process. And when you're presenting to your students, make sure that you have maybe in a 30-minute segment that there is at least 3 higher order thinking questions in that lesson. And this is proof that you are presenting your students with challenging questions and meeting their needs, so that they are advancing their learning as well. So as you get started with really intentionally, and you're probably already using hot questions in your classroom, but as you start to intentionally use hot questions, you might start to second guess yourself, but that's okay. I want you to be brave, because this is a process that just like your students are building their skills, so are you. In school, there is often a heavy emphasis on getting the right answer. So what happens if there is no one right answer? This can be scary. While you are jumping in, you will want to scaffold questioning so that your students develop as critical thinkers. Work your way up to hot questions in a way you're the swim teacher, and your students need to learn to swim out to provide the support to strengthen the classroom discussion. And you will build strong swimmers. Build capacity. Critical thinking requires creative responses to hot questions. And when you are using hot questions, think about wait time. You noticed when I was giving you those examples of how to change from maybe our more standardized ways of asking questions in the classroom to more of a hot question method, there was time involved. And we really want to give our students some time. And studies have been conducted on this quite thoroughly. And if we're giving our students even 3 to 5 seconds, what they're finding is that it increases the participation of students. It increases the depth of the response, and it definitely improves our students' retention. And there's actually more correct answers. So asking those hot questions and giving the time and space to find a good answer is super important. We know, and yeah, this is something that we're going to have to train our students on, because we know we have the eager beavers, right? So no, you're going to take your time, and we're going to give everybody the time to develop an answer for the question. We want that psychological safety, if you will. And as you work through the process, you'll use those scaffold techniques. You know what those are. We don't want to throw real challenging questions at them right away. We want to build up to it. And in so doing, we slowly are going to be moving away from that textbook into some deeper learning. And that is so important. So how can we churn up the heat on hot questions? Let's use it every day in our lessons. And make sure that we're looking for ways to include all the students in that process. We want students asking the hot questions too. It's not just for the teachers. It's even more important for the students. Extend that think and wait time. And it gives the teacher opportunity to talk less. We talk too much, right? We can talk less, ask more, and get our students doing the work that they're there to do. They're going to do that synthesizing and creation and develop deeper understanding of the content and how they're going to use it. Because students don't respond if they feel rushed. Yes, it helps our students take greater ownership of learning. When they are required to synthesize information and respond to questions, especially hot questions, we're putting them in control of their learning. And it will help them to deepen comprehension. Because instead of just telling them stuff, we're now asking them to use that information. And then finally, it's going to help them make new connections and discoveries on their own. And that independent knowledge building is crucial to deep understanding. So why are we using the question formulation technique? This technique has been around since the early 80s, and it is just such a wonderful way to get our students really digging deep and creating their own questions. And you can use this process as well as you're thinking about your own higher order questions. Students can use their questions for many purposes. And this could be to conduct research reports, experiments, perhaps they're writing a paper, working on a project. It works really great with Socratic seminars and debates, as well as if they're thinking about preparing a presentation or conducting an interview. And then teachers can use the QFT in many ways to generate interest in a new topic, to stimulate new thinking, to introduce a topic. If you're using phenomena in science, this is a great technique for processing that phenomena. Setting a learning agenda, deepening comprehension. And then buried within that is formative assessment. All throughout, we're looking at that formative assessment, getting our students to respond to higher order questions, to those hot questions, can be a form of formative assessment. An exit ticket that is a response to a hot question is a great formative assessment. So what is the question formulation technique? First, you're going to view an entry event. Then students are going to produce questions. Then they're going to look at those closed and open-ended questions. They might need to flip some questions, and then we're going to prioritize questions. So that's the steps to the process. And when you're doing this with your students, you're going to want to review those steps every time before you get started with the question formulation technique. What could be a question focus? Well, here we have, maybe in the younger grades, you just give them a letter A. And the students can produce questions about the letter A. And it might be about the red of the letter A. But all of those are legitimate questions. Or in math class, what if you showed them this 24 equals plus, smiley faces? What could those be? Give that to your students. Let them really analyze that and come up with some questions that they have. This data graphic is great. Think of all the questions that could be generated from such a thing. Or we have an albino alligator. In science, I think that would be a wonderful piece of phenomena to get our students to start asking their own questions. So you can see that as great as this technique is, to get started, it's not that hard. A lot of different graphics will make great question focuses. And then we have the question formulation. So now we want to produce those questions. And as we go through this, I'm going to ask that you go to the attachments and you'll be able to pull up an organizer so that you can follow along and create your own questions as we work through the process. Ask as many questions as you can. Do not stop to answer, judge, or discuss the questions. Write down every question exactly as it is stated, and we do want to number them. And change any statement into a question. So as you do this with your class, once again, make sure to review the rules, because oftentimes kids might skip a question or ignore a question if we don't review the rules. It's not a time to judge the questions and decide which ones you like or not. It's pure brainstorming. So here is an example. Students are not engaged and are often bored in class. And here's our picture. So take a minute and brainstorm as many questions as you can about this statement and picture. Don't pause to decide if the question is good enough or not. Just brainstorm those questions and be sure to number them. And if you have a statement, flip it into a question. So pause the video and take a moment to brainstorm your questions. As you're working through the question formulation technique, be sure to work as a team, assign roles, and then follow the rules and produce questions until the time is up. And you'll see here, this is our focus question formulation technique guide that you have access to in the links. So please be sure to use this as you are going through what we're looking at today. Now, the next step is that, so now that we've produced the questions, look at the closed versus open-ended questions is our next step. So just to review, our open versus closed. Open questions often start with which one, what if, how, should, why, or how could. And our closed-ended questions might start with, might be easily answered with a yes or a no, just one right answer. And some of those examples are comparing a question like, who was impacted most negatively when BC joined the Confederation versus when did BC join the Confederation? We can see how those two questions are going to elicit very different amounts of knowledge, right? And very different types, very much instant recall, rather than synthesis and analysis, right? Now it is time to identify our open versus closed. With the open questions, we're going to mark those with an O, and the closed questions will mark those with a C. Now it's time to flip some questions. So we can convert open-ended questions to close-ended and close-ended to open-ended. So take a few of those close-ended questions and think about how we can reframe them into an open-ended question. And you can use this in a lot of different ways. You might ask the students to do 2 and 2. So for this practice, pause the video and flip 2 open-ended questions to closed and 2 closed-ended questions to open. Today's video. And our final phase is prioritize questions. So in this phase, we want to choose the 3 most important from your list and mark them with an X. And then consider, what was your reason for selecting those 3 questions? And then identify what numbers are your priority questions. And once you have this, then you can go to the next step. And whether that means that as a whole group, you come back together and share those most important questions to help drive the learning of the topic. It could be that way. This also works great for Socratic seminars. So now that the students have developed their priority questions, you can enter into that Socratic seminar and conduct it using those priority questions. But certainly don't skip using the questions once they're developed, because it's so crucial to for the students to know that these questions that they're developing will be used. And it is part of the learning process. Now on this next screen, I want to show you just how easy this is to do with in a virtual setting. So here we have the observed question focus, and we have all the rules for review, and then the steps that we're going to take to go through the process, and then the students are able to respond with their priority questions. So you can see how this can be done in small groups in a virtual setting. So I hope that you find this idea helpful. And this was done using Padlet, which is free. At least free, you get 3 Padlets, I think, only on a free version. To review, I hope you found the question formulation technique really helpful, and that you'll use those hot questions in your classroom. I hope that you filled your toolbox and full of great ideas to use hot questions with your students. And thank you for joining us, K-12 Outreach and Support. We do have our why, and that is to empower, educate, and inspire you, our community, so that you can take action, fulfill your purpose, and serve others. And we thank you for doing so. And for more on K-12 PD, please go to our bit.ly here, K-12 EdDev, and there are lots of webinars and quick tips. So we have stuff that's just a couple minute videos that will help you in the classroom immediately. And we have longer 30-40 minute videos, webinars, full of great information that can be very helpful for busy teachers in the classroom. And canyonpd.com is your one-stop shop for everything Canyon PD. And these are our references for today.